Okay, hello and welcome to a new week. So I have an exciting lecture for you today. It's about fallacies, crime, and security. So I think that's fun stuff. And let us get started. So the first thing that I want to talk about is fallacies themselves. And they're fun. If you've never learned about these, I'm glad that I'm the one to teach it to you. So I'm going to try and answer this question. What kinds of arguments are not logical, are not correct, are not allowed? Like what makes an argument just really, really bad? And if it has a fallacy in it, that's one thing, okay? So a fallacy is just this. It is when you make an error while you're arguing, okay? It thinks that that is too fancy of words. So it's just you were trying to argue something. There is some argument going on. There has to be one of those. And you didn't follow the rules correctly, okay? You made an error in your reasoning, and therefore your argument is immediately, automatically false. An argument that has a fallacy in it is called fallacious, and it's automatically false, and you cannot trust it, okay? So if you find a fallacy in someone's argument, it's automatically not a good one. It's bad, and it doesn't make any sense, okay? So people like to use fallacies, though. People, corporations, governments, etc. They all use fallacies to try and manipulate people, because that's what an argument is. They're trying to convince you of something, and they're trying to take the easy way out, okay? That's what a fallacy is doing. It's trying to trick you into doing something, okay? So I need to teach you, it's very important in this class, it's a critical thinking class, to learn to see through these things, okay? So I'm going to teach you a few of them, and then in a future essay you're going to explore some more, okay? So one thing I do want to hit hard right now is every fallacy has a name, okay? Let me put this in rainbow, because you can't just say, oh, this is a fallacy, and then not explain it. Every fallacy in this class, it's a logical fallacy, it has a name associated with it, and you have to give that name, okay? So keep that in mind in a future essay, okay? So yeah, fallacy just doesn't mean bad argument, it means it's this specific kind of bad argument. And so the first one that I'd like to teach you is called false dilemma, okay? It's also called false dichotomy, and so what it does is it makes you think that there are only two possibilities in an argument, when really there are more. So it's like, okay, it's only, like the world is only black or it's white, okay? Think of it that way. That's what false dilemma is trying to trick you into thinking, okay? The world is black or white. You can only have X or Y. You can't have something else. There's no Z, okay? Can't have a Z. That's the idea, okay? So that is the point. All right. For example, this fun thing on the right, USA, love it or leave it. I think there is a third option, like, okay, we're kind of stuck here. Maybe some things are bad. Maybe we're going to try and fix them. Something like that. Okay, there's at least a third option here. I hope you can see. All right, so here's my example for you of a false dilemma fallacy. And so if somebody says this to you, you say, no, your argument's wrong. It has a fallacy in it. It has the false dilemma fallacy. Okay, so there are only two kinds of people in the world. People who love Phoebe Bridgers and people who hate music. Okay, so that is unfortunately not true. It's possible that you just don't like Phoebe Bridgers' music and you like somebody else's. Okay, so that isn't, the world isn't black and white. It's not one or the other. You're trying to trick me into thinking something, into thinking some in a certain way. Okay, so that is my first example. How about this one? So Stacy spoke out against socialism, so she must be a fascist. Okay, I think I stole this from the internet somewhere. It's a very interesting one. So obviously that's not true. Okay, if she spoke out against socialism, maybe she's not a fascist. Maybe she has some ideas that are in between, okay? Maybe she likes some features of socialism, but not others, things like that. The world is not black and white. I think you have learned that by now. And so false dilemma, you should see right through, okay? So next time, I want you to think about an argument when somebody says, okay, you have something or something else. Maybe there's a third thing. So that's your first fallacy. And remember, whenever somebody gives you a fallacy in their argument, that argument is automatically wrong. Okay? So the next one is called ad populum, which is fun. Also called the bandwagon fallacy, if you translate it to English, kind of. But what this this really means ad populum. It's Latin for to the populace, or to the popularity, or to the people. Okay, so the idea is that they're trying to argue, somebody who uses this fallacy, they're trying to argue that something is true, or okay, or good, just because other people agree with it. Okay? So there's this idea of the populace, and if all the populace is like, oh yeah, I like X, XXX, we love X, then they go and claim that, oh yeah, X is good. Checks out because all these people love it. Yeah? So that is not a valid argument, and let me give you some examples why. So here is a good one. Drink Gatorade because that's what the professional athletes do to stay hydrated. Okay? So lots of advertisements love using the ad populum fallacy. Okay? You shouldn't just drink Gatorade because other people are drinking it, because athletes are drinking it. Maybe they're paid to drink it. Maybe they really drink water in their Gatorade bottle. Okay? You have no idea the lengths that people would go. Okay? So that's my first example. How about this one? Jimi Hendrix used Fender Stratocasters, so my life won't be complete without one. I kind of agree with this, but it's really wrong. Okay? It is an ad populum fallacy where somebody likes something, and so I must like that thing too. That's not the case. Okay? That's really not the case. And to drive the point home one last time is, okay, another example of ad populum is my parents believe this, so I must too. It's probably the right thing. And that is, of course, not always true. Okay? So hopefully you're getting an idea of things that maybe you've seen these in real life. Hopefully you have some examples in the back of your mind, and now you'll notice them forever. Like, no, that's ad populum. I can't believe this. This is wrong. Wake up, sheeps. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going through a few more fallacies, and that is the idea. So the next one is called circular reasoning. And it's fun because it's surprisingly hard to notice. Okay, so circular reasoning is when you repeat your assumption as your conclusion. So you're going to assume something in this fallacy, like assume X, and then go around and say, oh yeah, therefore, X must be true. And you think that this is obvious. Like, obviously this is happening, this is wrong, this nobody could try and fool me with this kind of argument, but it does happen. Okay? It's a bit, you'd think that it would be easy to notice, but really it's sometimes not. It's also called begging the question, if you've heard that before. So you're reusing your assumption as your conclusion, and here's a fun example of that. Here are some more quotes of things. Okay? It's like, opium induces sleep because it has a soporific quality. And so this is trying to sound smart, right? Maybe we've done this in an essay once upon a time. This word just means sleep-inducing. So it's trying to say, yes, it induces sleep because it's sleep-inducing. Yeah? That's unfortunate. So big words are common ways that people try and hide circular reasoning. Let's have a new one. Everyone wants to buy Phoebe Bridgers' new album because it's the hottest album this season. Okay, you see how that's tricky? Like, okay, I can kind of get behind that. It makes sense. Everyone wants to buy it. It's the hottest album this season, but that's really saying the same thing. Everyone wants to buy it because it's hot. That's just two different ways to say the album is popular. Okay? That is the idea. Okay? So I hope you see circular reasoning is trying to trick you, but you will not be tricked in the future. Okay? Let's see here. This is a fun example that I stole from the internet. It's, again, an example of people using very flowery language to try and hide things, try and convince you of something. So, to allow every man an unbounded freedom of speech must always be, on the whole, advantageous to the state, for it is highly conducive to the interests of the community that each individual should enjoy a liberty perfectly unlimited of expressing his sentiments. Okay. Oh man, oh man. a liberty, everyone should enjoy liberty of perfectly unlimited of expressing his sentiments, that's just saying freedom of speech, okay? Everyone should have freedom of speech because everyone should have freedom of speech. Ho-ho. So, don't let the flowery language fool you, okay? So that is circular reasoning. Let us continue. Okay. Denying the antecedent. So this is an interesting one because it's our first formal fallacy. This one has to do with like real logic, like our ands, our ors, our nots, our implies, and things like that. So it is from logic itself. It's a logical term. All right, and the way that this works is the following. So again, there's an assumption and a conclusion, and the idea is we're assuming that this is true, like this weird thing. If P, then Q is true. We're assuming that, and we're trying to conclude based on this assumption, okay? Trying to use this assumption to conclude the following. If not P is true, then not Q is true, okay? If not P, then not Q. So let me show you that this is not a valid argument. Like you're assuming you have if P, then Q. P implies Q. And you're trying to prove that, okay, if not P, then not Q. Oops. And this seems like, okay, maybe I can put some nots and it's all equivalent. But it's really not. Okay, no pun intended. So here's my example. If you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. That's our assumption, okay? Assume this, also assume this, and then try and conclude. That's my conclusion right there. Okay, so assume these two things, then try and prove this last thing. So if you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. So the you are a ski instructor can be RP, and you have a job can be RQ. Okay, so if you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. We're saying that. And then we're trying to say, okay, you are not a ski instructor, therefore you have no job. So see how that is not P. Okay, ski instructor. You are a ski instructor, you are not a ski instructor. That is the negation of the P. Let me write that cleaner. And then the conclusion is, therefore you have no job. Ooh, that is the negation of Q, is it not? Ho ho. That's quite nice. So, that is wrong on many counts. Let's see why. So we're assuming that, okay, if you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. That makes sense, of course. Ski instructors are usually employed, right? And then we're assuming, like, okay, you're not a ski instructor. I'm a computer science teacher, right? I'm not a ski instructor. But then we're trying to conclude the negation of the conclusion up here. Therefore, you have no job. No, I have a different job. It's just not a ski instructor job. So the idea is you cannot go from here to here. It doesn't work. Okay? It makes no sense. It does not work. So that is a formal fallacy, and it got a bit fancy, but I hope you see the general idea. We're trying to assume one kind of implication, and then we're trying to prove a different kind. Okay? Different kind of if-then statement. All right. So that is denying the antecedent. How about this one? Tu quoque. This is another Latin one. It's Latin for you too. So you're like arguing with someone and you're saying back at them, you too. Okay. So sometimes also called appeal to hypocrisy, because when you bust this out, you are being a hypocrite. Okay? Let's talk about it. So what it's really trying to do when you say you too is you're trying to deflect blame. You're trying to distract from what you're really trying to, from what the other person is really trying to say. Okay? So it's trying to distract from the real argument by pointing out hypocrisy in the opponent. Like, you did this thing too. You can't blame me for it. Obviously, you like doing it as well. That's the idea. So the quintessential example of this is the U.S. criticizes Russia. Let's pick on Russia right now for doing something silly, like some kind of recent human rights violation. And then Russia comes back at the US. They're throwing shade, and they're like, Russia is saying, no, no, no. The US, you have done some horrible things as well. And here's a list. Okay? So the idea is they're trying to deflect blame. They're saying, oh, the US was criticizing us, but for doing something bad. And then, well, they've done it too. Why? You have no right to tell us that it was a bad thing. Okay? That's the idea. So obviously there are different levels of badness. I think you can see how this is just a problem. But it also brings up the point of you can be a hypocrite and still be right about some things, right? Like the US was being hypocritical, technically, originally, because they have done silly things as well. But they were still right. Like the Russians shouldn't have done this thing, right? So you can be a hypocrite. Like the first person could be a hypocrite and still be right. Like, yeah, Russia, that was a bad thing, even though we've messed up as well. Okay, so that's 2 quoque. Fun stuff. I think you can see, like, you can think of all the different ways you can make arguments with these different fallacies, and they're just fun. Fun to point out now that you know about them. Okay, so here's one with a bunch of text because it's a long example, but it's a fun one. Okay, so genetic fallacy is this. It is basing an argument solely on someone's or something's history. So like where it came from, the origin or the source when that information was not relevant to the current argument that's going on. Okay? So it's when you're talking, like you're trying to argue against something by talking about the past when the past is no longer relevant. When it's no longer relevant. Okay, so let's go to this. So the abstract example of this is something used to be bad, but times have changed, like, and the old concept doesn't apply. So that thing that used to be bad is now good. Okay, this is the idea. So here is my fun example that I stole from the internet. You're not going to wear a wedding ring, are you? Don't you know that the wedding ring originally symbolized ankle chains worn by women to prevent them from running away from their husbands? I would not have thought you would be a party to such a sexist practice. So apparently, I didn't do any research about this, but maybe this is true. Let's assume that this is true for the example. And this person just wants to wear a wedding ring to symbolize the love that they have for their partner, and then somebody's hitting them back with, hey man, this was all about ankle chains back in the day, and running away from your husbands and preventing that. Why would you want to do this? Where the idea of wearing a wedding ring nowadays, I think, has a different meaning. I think you might agree. So that's the idea. You're trying to break down someone's argument using concepts or ideas from the past that are no longer relevant in the current day. Okay? That's the idea of the genetic fallacy. It's an interesting one. So here's another example. This news story about the Purple Party candidate must be fake since it was made by XYZ News. That station is owned by someone who is against the Purple Party. We can't trust them. Okay? So, a lot of times people think this way, and it does have some truth. They're usually a bit more critical sometimes, but you also have to notice that maybe this news story was true after all. It's okay to report on something that's true. I think most news stations try and do that, but it's not okay to trust it just because it was posted by these people. You do have to think clearly about what they're trying to say and see if they're trying to sell you something, if they're using a different kind of fallacy. But just because a news organization is owned by somebody who doesn't like a certain party doesn't mean that the original story was false. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the origins of this story, or the origins of this station, have no impact on the truth of what the story is. Okay, origins have no impact on truth. It's probably the case that whatever new story came out on XYZ News about this purple party was a bit harsher than it needed to be, maybe, but that doesn't mean it was false. Okay, that's the idea. So that is the genetic fallacy. Okay, now here's one you might have heard before. It's a popular one that's thrown around on Twitter because people use it a lot. It's called the straw man fallacy. And what you do here is when you are trying to argue against something that somebody is trying to say. So you have an opponent in the argument, and you're trying to attack their position without actually attacking their position. You're trying to attack a different thing. You're trying to pretend that they're saying something different. You're attacking a position that your opponent doesn't actually hold. And the idea is you're turning their argument into something that wasn't really their argument. You're turning it into another one that can easily be defeated. And that's the idea. So it's made of straw. You can push it over very easily. You're trying to put words in their mouth. Okay? That's the idea. Putting words in someone's mouth. That's a good way of explaining it. Okay, so here is an example of what I think from the internet said that this was a real case. So it was a closing argument from a real jury trial, from a bank robbery case. And here is what one of the lawyers said. So I submit to you that if you can't take this evidence and find these defendants guilty, then we might as well open all the banks and say, come on and get the money, boys, because we'll never be able to convict them. So this is unfortunate, but I hope you can see through this. This is saying that if this evidence wasn't enough for these defendants to prove that they were guilty, then we might as well just open the banks for everybody, because we're never going to be able to convict anybody ever in the future, because this case should have been shut, right? It's obvious that they were at fault. So this is not true. This is not what the case is trying to say. I think that any court case is about those specific perpetrators, right, who supposedly committed some crime. They robbed a bank, I guess. And the arguments are supposed to be about the robbers in this particular case. Maybe there were some weird things about the stories from the witnesses or something that made the jury feel a little uneasy. It's not the case that, okay, if we can't find these people guilty, then we might as well just never try anyone ever again, because everyone can get away with robbing banks. So that's obviously not what the other side was thinking. I hope you can see. Okay, here's another one, an easier one to understand maybe, easier one to explain as well. So here's person A. The children's winter concert at the school should include some non-Christmas songs too. That's person A. And then person B is snapping back at them and saying, you won't be happy until Christmas songs are banned from being played on the radio. Okay, so they're kind of jumping to conclusions, and that is obviously not what this person A was trying to say. So it's like, okay, let's be inclusive maybe. Let's play that one Coldplay song that I really like. That has nothing to do with banning Christmas songs on the radio. Okay, it's a different argument. They're putting words in that other person's mouth. Okay, so they're trying to attack a position that your opponent doesn't really hold, because it's a lot easier to defend against this. Like, we should definitely allow Christmas songs to be played on the radio. That's the radio station's right. Yeah? So that's a straw man fallacy. And it is wrong to go and attack a different argument. Okay. So let's move on now to ad hominem. This is a fun one. Another Latin one. People like to use Latin in logic. So it's Latin for to the man or to the person. Okay? Hominem means like human. So let's talk about it. So it's trying to attack the arguer instead of the argument. And so you've seen this a lot, I'm sure. So you're trying to insult somebody. And that insult is trying to argue what the other person argue against what the other person is saying. Okay? So you're trying to attack them like, no, you're stupid, you suck. And that's supposed to win the argument. Okay? So that's the idea. Who knows why that is a grammatical error? It really is not. So here's an example. Here's a few. Jones likes a football team from the East Coast. So silly Jones, clearly he's unfit to be a police chief in California, when obviously that has nothing to do with your ability to be a police chief. If you like, I don't know, whoever is on the East Coast, the Packers or somebody. Okay? That is the idea. So, okay, that's the first one. Second one, you cheated and lied to your wife, but you expect the jury to believe you now, which is a legit argument that people can use to the jury to try and go against somebody's credibility, but this is not the case. Like, maybe this person is telling the truth here. You shouldn't use one thing, one error that they made perhaps in the past, to argue that everything you do in the future is wrong. Okay, that's another ad hominem argument, ad hominem fallacy example. And then another one is, maybe you've heard this one, you're too young to understand. Okay, that's, again, talking to the person about, okay, you'll never understand this, so obviously you have no clue about this argument. I am right. You must listen to me. Okay, so that is ad hominem. So that is the idea. Okay, so for this one, for example, maybe I should write down, like, the case originally had nothing to do with this, maybe. Maybe it wasn't a divorce case. Then it's really wrong. Okay, so those are the fallacies, and hopefully it'll be easier for you to, like, pick them apart and see them for what they are when somebody uses them in real life. So I look forward to that. You'll have an essay on that soon. And now let's talk about crime and security. So here are the questions I'm going to try and answer in this little subsection. So what bad stuff has happened due to technological advances? Because some things have. And how can we stay secure on the internet, or just like our interconnected devices somewhere else, okay? Over Bluetooth, for example. So let's talk about hacking. That is probably what you think about when you think of crime on the internet and being secure against hackers. So I should tell you that hacking used to be a good thing. That was like a positive term to associate with somebody. It just meant that that person was good at computers if they were a hacker. Okay? And if you go on in your computer science studies, you will hear your instructors say the word hack all the time. And that just means, like, oh man, this code that I just wrote was a hack. Or the code that you wrote here was totally a hack, but it worked. Okay, so it still means something good. Okay, it's something completely different. So that word has been repurposed, I think you can imagine. Nowadays, for the general public, hacking means a bad thing. If someone's a hacker, that is a horrible, horrible term to associate with them. Okay? And the reason we got here is because people started to cause damage. They started to do things. Things were on the internet nowadays. They could just sit in their house and break into a machine somewhere. That is the idea. So let's talk about the first things that went bad. The first instances of hacking was more just for fun back then. When computers started interconnecting things. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about is this concept called phone phreaking. Okay, it's a fun little word that people made up. And what it did was there was a device that these people made, and the phreakers made, and it faked long-distance routing tones. You maybe have no idea what that means because you were not born in a time when payphones were a concept, or like long-distance calls were a concept, but that's okay. I'm about to teach it to you. Either way. So, believe it or not, people used to use payphones, and that was just a box with a phone in it, right? Little phone. And you put your money in the little slot, and it connects to your call. And calls used to be cheaper when they were in the same area code, right? Than the 559. It was a lot cheaper to call people then to make a long distance call, maybe to like Southern California or something, or across the East Coast, or maybe even across continents. Okay, so that is the backstory. And so these people, they made devices to fake tones, because this, like telephone companies were using computers then to route people. Like, okay, you're trying to make this long distance call. Let me hook you up with the operator on the East Coast who can complete that call for you. And so the idea was, whenever you put a coin in, or whenever it tried to connect you to somebody else across a distance, they made this box that made that same sound. So like maybe they made the "I put a quarter in" sound. They made a little box that you could put into the, like, it emitted sound, and you could put next to the receiver, and it would fake the phone box into thinking that you actually put a quarter in when you really didn't, or you were actually routed across to the East Coast. You put enough money in for that. That's the idea. And so that's phone phreaking. That was back in the day. It was mostly innocuous. It was just to say that you did it. It wasn't like people were trying to like get into secret things and pretend they were other people. But there's a fun story on the internet, if you look it up. Somebody pretended to be like the president, and they called the Pope, and they almost got through. They were one person away from getting to the Pope. They got to like his manager or something at the time. So that was fun. A fun little story that you can look up. Maybe your book even has it. So that is phone phreaking. And nowadays, we have worse stuff. We have worms and viruses, which maybe you have heard about. So let's talk about the simpler one, a virus. A virus is a malicious program. It's bad, obviously, and it needs to be activated, okay? It needs to be run by somebody. So you have to maybe double-click a file that you downloaded from a shady website. It was like, download this game for free, and then you double-click it, and oh no, it wasn't a game. It just stole all of your credit card information. Okay, that's what a virus is. It needs to be activated. That's the key thing with a virus. And a worm, on the other hand, that one's a bit fancier because it's capable of self-replication and self-activation. So it can copy itself to other places, whereas for a virus, it needs to be activated as well as like downloaded. And that's the idea. Whereas a worm can download itself to other places. It can see what other computers it can talk to and make sure that those get the worm as well. And it can activate itself. It can double-click itself. Okay, it can turn itself on. So that's why people are a bit more concerned with worms. But viruses are, of course, still very bad. And I think you can imagine that the only reason we have these is because of the internet. There weren't interconnected computers across large distances before. There was no need for this. But now we have viruses. Now we have worms. It's all very weird. Okay, so that is viruses versus worms. And let's talk about more hacker things. So companies, they actually hire people that are hackers. They actually hire hackers to test whether or not their systems are secure. And now there's a concept of different kinds of hacking. Like, okay, you're getting paid by a company to figure out whether or not things are going wrong. You are what's known as a white hat hacker. Okay, that's a white hat. Those are good. We like them. That's in contrast to what's called a black hat hacker. And that is, those are the ones we don't like. Okay, so we don't like them. Or they're happy, but we're not. Okay, so that's black hat hackers. We employ the white hats to try and make sure that our systems are secure. So it's not just a bad thing to be a hacker still. It's a bad thing to be a black hat hacker. Okay, and bad things continue to happen. Like these viruses and these worms, they don't just like say, "Ooh, I got you," like they might have used to. Now they're trying to steal personal things. Steal information about your bank account, steal your social security number, things like that. Okay, so that is a lot of history to try and explain why these words, why the word hacker is not very happy anymore. Okay, it's not very happy of a word. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some examples of hacking in recent days, and this is a fun one. Stuxnet, I think that's how you pronounce it at least. It's a worm, but it's a very, very sophisticated worm, and we think that it was made by governments themselves, so they had the resources to make a good one. What it did was it targeted, not like worms do normally, where they try to just get anywhere they can, get on anybody's computer that they can find over the internet. This one, it targeted a special kind of computer, a special kind of control system, and that control system controlled heavy machinery, and also, on top of that, on top of the fact that it was only for heavy machinery systems, it only infected specific computers, and so it knew to go looking in a certain place. It only infected specific computers in a certain country. Okay? So it knew to go looking only in Iran. Okay? The idea was it infected these computers and it damaged this equipment because it's like, okay, do this thing with your heavy machinery that's going to break that same heavy machinery. It damaged equipment in a uranium enrichment plant in Iran. Okay, starting in 2008, that's when the people who were in charge there, they noticed that things were going wrong. And the idea is, the rumor is, that the US and Israel, they built it together to try and make sure that Iran doesn't enrich uranium enough to create like a nuclear device. Okay? Like some kind of bomb. So that is Stuxnet, and it's a very interesting example of a worm where it wasn't just a random hacker or something like that. It was a government, we assume, that multiple governments, in fact, that made this thing. Okay? So that is a fun worm. Here's another one that you might have heard about if you remember back in the day. It was in 2013, and your book talks about this one, if you'd like to read about it further. It happened... It breached Target itself, but it didn't start through Target, which is interesting. It wasn't actually Target that got hacked originally. And that's okay. And originally in parentheses because they're about to get hacked because of this first company that got hacked. So Fazio Mechanical, which I hope that's how you pronounce it, was just a normal business. It was not Target. It was not the size of Target. It was just a tiny little business that did heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration maintenance. Okay? HVAC stuff for Target. And they employed them. Okay? So the idea was people at this company who had computers that they would plug into their little heating systems wherever they worked, and they would eventually work at Target. Okay, they'd go on the roof or something, and they'd eventually log into a Target system. And this is where the fun started. Okay, it was a fun little virus, and so it did what's called phishing. Okay, and this is when you attempt to get somebody's information by pretending. You pretend to be someone else. Okay, that's what phishing means. I think you've heard of like the term catfishing. It's a similar kind of word. Okay, and so what happened was just one employee. That's all it took, right? At this small little company, Fazio Mechanical, they got sent a phishing email, which is like, okay, enter your password. It was incorrect. Blah blah blah. You think it was sent by Microsoft or something, but it really wasn't. And so they clicked on that link and inserted their password or something, and then they download some silly update that wasn't really an update, something like that, and then they installed a virus on their computer. And what that virus did was steal usernames and passwords, okay? That's the idea. So, that's unfortunate, and it's going to steal any usernames and passwords that it finds, and eventually, because somebody hooked this up to a target system, it tried to go and replicate itself. So it was both a virus and a worm, I guess we could say. So it stole usernames and passwords of any computer that was plugged into, And so eventually it got to the target systems, and hackers gained access to like whatever database password was needed to get at the credit card data. Ooh, that's no fun. And so obviously they started spending a lot of money, and banks everywhere had to spend a lot of extra money, $200 million, your book says, to reissue credit cards on top of dealing with all the fraud, like doing all the chargebacks and things like that. So that was fun. So that's your target breach. Maybe you remember that. That is all that happened. Was it only took one, right? It's just like coronavirus. It only took one person to start spreading something. That's the idea, and it can get out of hand. Okay, so that is the target breach. I have a couple more examples, and that'll be that. So the next one is biometrics. So a lot of biological features, like if you see those fancy movies, they talk about this. Biological features are unique, like your irises, the patterns that are inside of those. And so, okay, let's just use that as a key, since we'll never use that. We'll never lose that. Sorry, we'll never lose our thumb. Most people have those, and so that's the idea. It's something that you don't have to worry about forgetting, because you have your biological feature that stays with you. And so this is used a lot in places where you need high security, like airport personnel, for example, and they can, unfortunately, can be fooled. Okay, biometrics, you can fool them by like taking a cast of somebody's hand, or I don't know, shining light really bright or really dim, something like that. It is quite difficult, but it's still possible. But we're trying to like fight. So that is the idea. Okay, you have these biometric features like fingerprints, iris shapes, etc., that are unique, and we're trying to use those instead. But unfortunately, some systems can still be fooled, and there's just this tug of war that's going on between hackers and people who want to secure things. Okay, so all right, so let's talk about now security, another facet of security, how everything is secure on the internet. TLS. It stands for Transport Layer Security, and it's a fun one because this is what like Amazon is using. This is how your computer makes sure nobody else is listening in but you and the website you're talking to. Okay? So it's the way all your internet traffic is kept secure. You're trying to log in on Facebook, you're trying to buy something on Amazon. It's all made secure through TLS, through Transport Layer Security. And what it does is it uses cryptography to make sure that everything is secure, to ensure that those things are secure. And for example, you can use RSA. Now that we know about that, you can totally use RSA encryption to make sure that everything is secure. Now this is actually part of a protocol that is really being used. People use RSA to make some really, really big key that they can then share, and it makes it fast to like send data across the internet. So I'd be happy to talk to you about this in office hours. It's a fun little concept. So now you know what's happening. Now you know why HTTPS is a thing. The S stands for secure. That uses TLS. Okay? That's the fun thing. So let me try and explain it. So you're trying to go somewhere. HTTPS, that's the key. Secure HTTP. You're trying to go like to Amazon or something. Amazon.com. That's a C-O-M. And then slash whatever. And so you're trying to set up you're trying to set up some communication between you, like here's your computer, and Amazon server, okay? Which is like some large box of a computer sitting somewhere in a warehouse. And Amazon server has like a public and a private key, now that we know about those. And that allows, through TLS, your computer also has these keys, and then through TLS they can talk to each other and know that nobody's snooping. Okay? So that is the way things are being secure, and the idea is there's a certificate that's being passed along. That's what you're all sharing with each other. again, you also have pub/private key on your end, and that's how you share information. So a certificate is just something that a server uses, like Amazon, to prove to you, who's accessing it, that they are who they say they are. It's like, okay, this authority, this encryption authority made by somebody that we trust, is signing this website to make sure that it was the right thing. So we're not talking to somebody who's pretending to be Amazon, we're really talking to Amazon. Okay, so that's transport layer security in a nutshell. There's a lot to talk about, but hopefully that's a good start. And then finally, let's talk about something that is a bit controversial. Okay, so backdoors for law enforcement. This is a fun one. So the idea is all the law enforcement agencies of the world, they don't like things when things are encrypted in a way that encryption is unbreakable. They can't crack it, so they can't figure out what these people were saying, and they don't trust these people. Maybe they're trying to research them as part of a crime. Okay, so let's talk about this. For example, this is one argument for a backdoor is a murder investigation by the FBI. It was stalled because they had trouble unlocking an iPhone. Okay, you might have heard about this. So that's one argument for it. Like, okay, the investigation could have gone a lot faster had there been a backdoor for these law enforcement officers. Okay, but then we go further than that. Many countries, many governments, they ask companies that are based there, like the US would ask Apple, and I guess China might ask TikTok to include backdoors for them in their software/systems, things like that. Okay? So that's where it gets weird, because now countries, they have control over the companies that live there, that are operating in their country. Oh man, they can ask them to include backdoors so they can see whatever they want to see about the users operating using the services provided by those companies. Ooh. Is that okay? That's the age-old question. I want you to think about this. So here are my ideas of what Cotton Mill might think, but obviously you can argue many, many things. That is the hope. Oh, and just in case you are unfamiliar with the term backdoor, in case my examples aren't driving the point home, it's just a way to break encryption. A way to break the encryption so that they can actually see what's going on. Okay, so Kant would be asking the question like, should we always give things to law enforcement when they need it? Okay, they need this information, should they have it? And I think this could go either way. Kant is probably a huge proponent of privacy laws, so he might say no, but he could also say, yeah, it makes sense for law enforcement. I mean, in a perfect world, they should have this stuff. So it could go either way. Mill as well would ask, what's the utility in this? And you could also have arguments either way, depending on how you see the balance between utility for and utility against. Okay? So maybe an argument for would be like, oh yes, this will help convict criminals. Obviously we need that. That's going to win, in my view. And then an argument against would be, oh, this is my private data. Nobody should be able to see that other than me and people I explicitly share it with. Okay? So that's the idea. Should we have this? Should we not have this? It's a very touchy subject. And one thing that solves this problem, one thing that makes this impossible to have, which is maybe a good thing in some people's minds, is open source. Open source to the rescue. They at least make it so that you can look at the source code for a program to make sure, like, okay, this has a backdoor and I'm okay now. I'm okay with using it, even though it has it. Or I looked at the source code, there is no backdoor. Haha, I'm totally going to use this and trust it. That's the idea. So open source comes to the rescue here for people who are either wary of having a backdoor or just want to make sure they know what's going on. Okay? So that is the last thing that I want to talk about for security. Okay, so we went far. We talked about we talked about quite a few things dealing with crime and security, as well as learning about all the different kinds of ways arguments could go wrong with fallacies. Okay, so that's where I want to leave us now. Hopefully that was a bunch of fun little topics, and I will come back and see you in your programming lecture. So I'll see you then.